Sarah clutched her coffee mug, the warmth a comfort against the September chill. Outside, the old brick building of Maplewood High loomed, its ivy-covered walls whispering tales of bygone years. She, Sarah Williams, fresh out of university, was the new English teacher, her heart a mix of excitement and apprehension. The school, though grand, had an air of melancholy. Long, shadowy corridors stretched into darkness, and the silence, even during the bustling morning rush, seemed to hum with unseen energy. Sarah shivered, blaming the draught, but deep inside, a prickle of unease ran down her spine. Her classroom, located on the top floor, was spacious but dusty. Sunbeams filtering through the tall windows illuminated motes of dust dancing in the air. As Sarah unpacked her books, a floorboard creaked behind her. She turned, but there was nothing. The bell jangled, its sharp sound echoing through the empty classroom. Students, their faces a mix of curiosity and indifference, filled the room. Sarah, with a deep breath, plastered a confident smile on her face. But the feeling of being watched, of being not entirely alone, lingered. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah settled into a routine. Her students warmed up to her passion for literature. Yet, the unsettling feeling remained. It lurked in the shadows, whispered in the rustle of leaves. One evening, Sarah stayed late, grading papers. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. As she walked, she felt a cold spot. The hair on her neck stood on end. She stopped, her breath catching. A shadow moved, a flicker of darkness. Sarah blinked, but it was gone. She hurried towards the exit. The heavy oak doors creaked shut behind her. As she drove home, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The strange occurrences continued. Books toppled from shelves in the library, their pages rustling as if turned by an unseen hand. Whispers, faint and indistinct, reached Sarah's ears when she was alone in her classroom. Chalk dropped from her hand, shattering on the floor, even though she could have sworn she had a firm grip. One afternoon, as Sarah walked past the old auditorium, she heard music. It was a melancholic tune, played on a piano, the notes echoing through the empty hall. Intrigued, she pushed open the heavy doors. The auditorium was dark, the velvet seats shrouded in shadows. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight that pierced through a gap in the curtains. The music stopped, the silence suddenly heavy and profound. Sarah, her heart pounding in her chest, backed out of the auditorium, closing the doors on the unsettling emptiness. Determined to uncover the truth behind the strange events, Sarah began researching the school's history. The librarian, a kindly old woman with twinkling eyes, led her to the archives, a dusty room filled with old yearbooks and faded photographs. It was there that Sarah stumbled upon the story of Eliza Blackwood, a talented pianist and student at Maplewood High in the 19th century. Eliza's portrait, her eyes full of dreams and melancholy, stared back at Sarah from the brittle pages of an old yearbook. According to the records, Eliza had died tragically at the young age of 17, just days before she was to perform at a prestigious music competition. The details of her death were scant, but rumors of an accident, perhaps even suicide, swirled around her story. Sarah, her fingers tracing Eliza's name in the dusty yearbook, felt a pang of sympathy for the young girl whose life had been cut short. Could Eliza be the source of the strange happenings at Maplewood High? Was her spirit, restless and searching, reaching out from beyond the grave? The air grew colder, the shadows longer as Halloween approached. The strange occurrences intensified, becoming more direct, more frightening. One evening, while working late, Sarah felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But there was no one there. The room was empty, the silence broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. But Sarah could still feel the lingering coldness where the hand had touched her, a bone-chilling reminder that she was not alone. Later that night, as she locked up, she heard her name being whispered. The voice was faint, almost inaudible, but it sent chills down her spine. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the empty hallways. Sarah ran, her footsteps echoing in the stillness, until she burst out into the night, gasping for breath. Section 6. The Figure in the Auditorium. The following day, Sarah decided to confide in her colleague, Mrs. Davis, the history teacher. Mrs. Davis, a seasoned teacher with a no-nonsense demeanour, listened patiently to Sarah's story. When Sarah finished, Mrs. Davis sighed, her face etched with concern. "Eliza Blackwood," she said, her voice low. "Her spirit has haunted this school for years." Mrs. Davis went on to tell Sarah more about Eliza's story. According to local legend, Eliza had been deeply in love with a young man, but their love had been forbidden. Heartbroken, she had taken her own life in the auditorium, her final act a tragic performance of despair. That evening, Sarah found herself drawn back to the auditorium. The heavy doors creaked open, revealing the darkened space. She took a hesitant step inside, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she saw her. A figure sat at the grand piano on the stage. It was a young woman, her back to Sarah, her long dark hair cascading down her back. The figure was playing the same melancholic tune that Sarah had heard before. Section 7. Trapped in the library. Frozen in fear, Sarah could only watch as the figure's fingers danced across the keys. The music swirled around her, filled with a haunting sadness that sent shivers down her spine. As the last note faded, the figure turned and Sarah gasped. The face was Eliza's, her eyes wide and sorrowful, her skin pale and translucent. She reached out a hand, her touch beckoning, inviting. Sarah, her voice caught in her throat, turned and ran. She ran through the darkened hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The library doors burst open and Sarah stumbled inside, slamming them shut behind her. She leaned against the heavy oak, her chest heaving, her mind racing. She was trapped. The library was locked, the windows barred, and she was alone with Eliza's ghost. Sarah sank to the floor, her back against a bookshelf, her eyes darting around the darkened room. The silence was broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Section 8. The Truth Revealed. Suddenly a light flickered on in the back of the library. Sarah, her heart pounding, watched as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Mrs. Davis, her face pale but determined. "It's all right, Sarah," Mrs. Davis said, her voice calm and reassuring. "I know what's going on." Mrs. Davis revealed a secret that had been hidden for years. She was a descendant of Eliza Blackwood, and she had inherited Eliza's musical talent. The strange events, the whispers, the music, it had all been Mrs. Davis. She had been trying to draw attention to Eliza's story, to clear her name and give her the recognition she deserved. The story of Eliza's suicide had been a lie, a cover-up to protect the reputation of a prominent family in town. Eliza, in reality, had been murdered by her jealous rival, another music student. The truth had been hidden, buried deep within the annals of the school's history. Section 9. A Haunting Melody. Mrs. Davis, with tears in her eyes, played Eliza's favourite melody on an old dusty violin she had found in the library's archives. The music filled the air, a haunting and beautiful tribute to a soul silenced too soon. As the last note faded, a sense of peace settled over the library. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by tranquility. Sarah, watching Mrs. Davis, realised Eliza's spirit was finally at rest. The next day, the school buzzed with the news of Mrs. Davis's discovery. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about Eliza Blackwood, her talent, and her tragic death. The haunting of Maplewood High ended with a bittersweet resolution. Eliza's music became a reminder of the enduring power of truth.